please request permission from the meeting host.
Okay,
oh, it's on.
Going. All right.
Recording. I got it. We're good. Sorry. It's all you, Kirsten.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I do appreciate you guys joining in tonight. I'm going to pull up my slide deck. So make sure you guys are able to share or to see my screen. I'm going to be doing a little bit of back and forth and testing my technological powers because I do, as Robin said, I do have a guest here today who is going to help do some demonstrations. Can you guys see my slide deck? Is that all you can see?
We can see the slide deck.
Can you see it fully?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, I can see your preview as well.
Okay.
Yeah, if you hit that little screen.
This one here.
Yeah.
Just don't want that to go. There we go. Okay, perfect. Okay. So technology is not my strong suit. I apologize. Okay, so we are going to, I'm going to start kind of talking a little bit through a few pieces at this point. This is part 2, essentially. I did a presentation back in October, kind of laying the groundwork for phonological awareness as far as what it is, why it's important, and a lot of the kind of theory and research behind it. But I really ran out of time in terms of being able to show and demonstrate and really give the practical side to it. So I want to make sure that that's what we really focus on today, that everyone can kind of come away with, now that we understand it, what do we do about it and how do we implement it either in the classroom with students we work with, at home with our children, or in any capacity that we might encounter someone who is a struggling reader. Are you guys able to see beyond the perfect? Okay, I've got help on what we see. Thank you. So I'm going to be bouncing around a little bit between my slide presentation and some actual demonstration. And as Robin said, I do have someone here who I work with who has done a lot of fantastic work in this area. He's come a really, really long way. So I'm really excited to have him step in to show you areas that we've done and how we can work through some of those pieces. Okay, before I begin jumping into phonological awareness though and phonemic awareness, I want to start by just addressing what dyslexia is. I know that we all come up from a variety of backgrounds. We have a variety of experience with the term and with all that goes into this complication. And so I want to make sure we just really lay the foundation since we are decoding dyslexia, and that is our mission. This is a big, long definition from the International Dyslexia Association, and I really like to break it up more in pieces. I give it to you as a whole here, but I do like to talk about it for the pieces that it represents. So dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin, really letting us know that it is categorized as a specific learning disability. That speaks to the category that we often see in diagnoses from the school district and under IDEA. It is a neurobiological difficulty that is truly wiring in the brain that is not connected the way that our typical readers are. And so there's truly difficulties in the brain that lead to the problems we see in our kids. Dyslexia is characterized by difficulties with accurate and/or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. So that really speaks to the word level difficulties that we see in dyslexia. That's really the true categorization of it, that kids are struggling at the word level. Word level reading is the challenge, and how to kind of piece apart words and figure out those words is where they essentially struggle. And that plays into both reading and into spelling. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language. I highlight that here because that leads us into our talk for today. It's the phonological piece, and phonology is essentially how sounds play into words and the understanding of sounds within our language. And it's that sound piece that really presents the biggest difficulty for these kiddos and how it plays into that word level difficulty. The difficulties that kids with dyslexia experience is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. So this really goes to say, and this is how, when I do my evaluations, this is the piece I really key into. Is it a reading disorder? Because there are a variety of other pieces that really play in. The child has other developmental disabilities, or they have a variety of issues with cognitive processing and cognitive abilities. Do they have other language deficits that are pretty significant? Or is this something that is really unexpected based on all their other skills? And that's really the true characteristic of dyslexia, to say that if we were to see this kid and talk to them and have a conversation, we wouldn't expect anything, because it comes down to the reading and to the sound pieces that we don't key into in our typical conversation. And so that is what helps us really define that diagnosis. And then in addition, secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experiences that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. So typically it's not the knowledge of vocabulary or the reading comprehension that's the true deficit. It's the fact that they're not accurately reading off the page and pulling the word consistently enough, or quickly enough, or smoothly enough, or accurately enough to be able to pull the information together in order to generate meaning. And they do so much less reading than the students in their classes that are typical readers. And because of that, they don't have the same level of access to vocabulary and background knowledge. So lots that go into this definition. It really is a pretty excellent definition that really kind of gets the full basis and really wraps around the pieces that categorizes this diagnosis. But with that said, because that phonological component is so big, I really want to spend most of our time talking about that tonight. And I want to start by defining a few terms. So we often hear these two terms, phonological awareness and phonemic awareness, somewhat interchangeably. And there is a difference between them, and I want to explain what that is and kind of what goes into both of those pieces. Now, phonological awareness is really an overarching awareness of the properties of sounds within words. I think of phonological awareness, I like this image here, in that it's kind of that umbrella term. It kind of overarches and it incorporates all the variety of pieces that and how sounds play into words. Phonemic awareness fits within that right here. Now, some of the other pieces of phonological awareness that don't fit into phonemic awareness include words and sentences. This is important because as kids are learning and developing their language skills, what they hear is they hear sentences as a long string. They don't hear all the individual words that go into it. And as children develop, they start to piece that out and realize that words are the pieces that then make up these sentences. It's not one long continuous string. But initially in typical development, they don't necessarily realize that. And sometimes in atypical development, that doesn't become clear without instruction. Another piece that falls into phonological awareness is syllables. And so syllables are chunks of words. They include one vowel sound, I should say. And they form together to make up pieces of more complex words. So the ability to kind of clap out or tap out the different syllables in words is one of the skills that we look for and that we work on to build up that phonological awareness skill. Onset rhyme is essentially, so an onset is any consonants that come at the beginning of the word. The rhyme is the first vowel through the end of the word. And so we play into that because that helps kids to develop rhyming skills. It helps them to understand how words can start to break apart into smaller sounds. And it can give them some of that idea of how they can start to individualize these sounds a little bit. And then rhyme and alliteration is essentially how sounds can play off of each other in words. So rhyming is when the rhyme unit or the vowel through the end of the word sounds the same as another word with a different first sound. Alliteration is the opposite, where the first sound is the same and then the rest of the word can be different. And that's just, we use that a lot. Stories and nursery rhymes are really fantastic because they help really build up those skills and get kids hearing them and paying attention to those. Now, within phonemic awareness, this breaks down into all the individual sounds in words. So we're not talking anymore about chunks in words. We're not talking more about words as a whole. We're talking about every individual sound that goes into a word. And some of the pieces that we look at here are isolation. So can a child take a word and individually isolate a sound in that word? So if I were to say, what is the first sound in the word cat? We'd want them to let us know that the sound is k. We also want them to be able to recognize what the last sound is in the word, as well as the middle sound in the word, as well as the second sound or the fourth sound. You can go on, and you can work on this in a variety of ways, but that's essentially what isolation entails. Segmenting is where we take a word and we pull every sound apart in that word. So if we take the word cat and we segment it, we just sound out every individual sound, k, ah, and t. Blending is the opposite, where a child hears sounds and then they string it together to figure out what the word might be. So if I were to say k, ah, t, what is the word you hear? They would tell me cat. Addition, deletion, and substituting are three components of what we call manipulation activities. And that involves manipulating sounds in words to come up and create other words. So addition is where we might add a sound onto a word to create a different word. Deletion is where we might take a sound away from a word, and substituting is where we might switch sounds out. Okay, so hopefully that gives some basis for the conversation. Please feel free to ask questions if more specific information would be helpful. Now,
Kirsten,
yes.
we do have a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay.
Looking for a qualified SLP, is there any sort of directory that would help someone find an SLP like you, but in Eastern Idaho?
In Eastern Idaho. There is, I am aware of, I just recently became aware of a group in Eastern Idaho in, now you're actually testing my geography, Idaho Falls and Rigby and those areas, are those all Eastern Idaho?
Yes, correct.
Woo-hoo. Okay, so there is a clinic over there that I have heard of. There are a couple of therapists who do have strong interest in working on literacy. And so from what I heard, they do work with a neuropsychologist who does some assessment, and they help follow up with some of the therapy behind that. So we do have I do have a list with the information on it. I can get that out and I can send out a follow-up email to the list of registrants if that would be helpful with that information.
That would be awesome.
Perfect.
And then a question about screening tools. What screening tools would you recommend a school could use in kindergarten and first grade to identify dyslexic tendencies earlier?
Okay, that's a whole nother presentation, guys. There are some great tools. There are, and you're asking the perfect question. We need that question asked, and we need that question answered. And we need the state to follow up on that question. So that's another one I can follow up with either in a different presentation or at a different time. I did include some informal tools in my previous presentation, and what I can do is I can send out the slides from this one as well as the slide deck from the previous in case you missed it, to see a few of those. I would say the screening tools that I sent out before or included in the other presentation are probably a little bit more appropriate, but they're great for both. I mean, they give great information on both ends, and it's what we really need. But I would say they're good for families at home that you can do too as well. But that's a really big topic. Again, I can dive into it in more depth, and if we want to have other conversations, but it's kind of too much for this presentation. I apologize. Any other questions?
That's it for now. Thanks.
Okay.
Jane raised her hand. Jane, did you have a question?
I did. I'm not sure if you can hear me. I know my video won't play even though I put video on, but I have a really quick question. If that's okay. Can you hear me?
I do. I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's about what you just covered. So I've been trying to dig into this stuff quite a bit recently, and I still don't get what the rhyme part of the word is. Could you just go over that one more time?
Definitely. So like in talking about like onset and rhyme.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So yes.
Great question, Jane.
Yeah, thanks. And I appreciate, if any of this doesn't feel clear or it needs more follow-up, I know I'm speaking to a really, really diverse audience. And so I want to make sure that I'm meeting everyone where they are. So please ask those questions if it's not hitting you where you need it. That's my whole objective. So, okay, we're going to take the word cat. So basically our rhyme unit is going to be anything from the vowel on through the end of the word. So that's the rhyme, and it's spelled a little bit differently. It's R-I-M-E, and that is the piece of the word that would essentially create a rhyming word. Then the onset is any consonants that come before it. So that is our onset right there. Now, we might have a word like, let's say our word is axe. So axe doesn't have a consonant before it. So we're just going to take our first vowel and move through the end. So that is our rhyme. It has no onset. So basically, easiest way I think to remember it is taking that first vowel and following it through the rest of the word. And that's going to be your rhyme portion. The onset is any consonants that come before that. Does that help clarify?
Yeah, that's a great example. That's exactly what I needed to hear. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And hope throughout this, we'll have opportunities to just jump in with questions as I get kind of through the lead up. It'll be all about demonstration and question and answer, and let's just kind of hash this out together. So
I have one more question.
yeah.
This brought up, what if the word was caterpillar?
Okay. So in multiple syllable words, the rhyme is going to be the rest of the word. So it's going to be all the syllables that go into it.
Okay, awesome.
Great questions, guys. Okay. So I really think of phonological awareness and phonemic awareness specifically as a significantly foundational skill. Linnea Airy says that phonemic awareness is central to learning to read and spell, and it's right on. We have to have that skill. Everything else pulls off of it. And if we don't have that, we don't have a strong foundation, and everything we try and stack on top of that is bound to crumble. So we want to make sure we get that strong, we get it solid, and then from that point we start to build up to make a strong foundation or a strong structure to really support reading. This chart here is from Schul and Boudreau, and it is just a chart that really nicely kind of lays out how phonological awareness development takes place and kind of the sequence in which to teach it. My focus tonight is not on phonological awareness, it's on phonemic awareness. So as you can see, from this point forward is where we're thinking about phonemic awareness. Phonological awareness takes place earlier in development, but phonemic awareness has skills that are really fundamental to reading, and they're going to be much easier to generalize and to put into functional context for kids to then start reading. Phonological awareness skills that don't incorporate the individual phonemes or sounds are not quite as generalizable and not quite, it's harder for kids to see how this functionally applies to the reading tasks that they're asked to do. So I often don't address these pieces once kiddos have typically been diagnosed with a diagnosis of dyslexia. I start about here and move forward. Some of these pieces I might tie in later on, but this is where I really want the bulk of my time to be spent. And I'll go through what each of these pieces, I'm going to go through that more in depth. So don't worry about that. I just want you to have this as reference as you move along. Same with this. I put this in here more as a reference. And again, I'll get you these slides. But this goes through and really just outlines how typical development of phonological awareness takes place so that you have that reference point. 80 to 90% of kiddos who achieve phonological awareness skills on target hit them at these ages. And these are the types of skills and where and when they meet those. And it gives a few nice examples too to help you understand exactly what that's talking about. But again, I'm not going to put much emphasis there because I really want to get into showing you and demonstrating and kind of working through it. So our prescription for struggling readers really needs to involve phonological awareness. The paradox here is that most of our packaged programs and assessments that are available in the schools do discontinue the training and the assessment of phonological awareness skills at the end of first grade. But typical children who are still developing phonological awareness in a typical fashion aren't usually done developing that skill until third or fourth grade. So we stop assessing it, we stop addressing it, and a lot of those kiddos who develop it typically continue to just kind of absorb it and take it in and build it. But our struggling readers have been struggling with it from the beginning, and they don't have that capacity to be able to continue to soak it in and absorb it. And they're not being assessed for it to see if this is really a problem to understand their underlying deficit. So this is what we really want to assess, we want to screen for, and we really, really want to make sure that we're targeting this when it's not intact. David Kilpatrick says that there's no age that is too old for a student to address phonemic awareness training. If the skill has not been mastered, the student should get phonemic awareness training. Research has shown that older struggling students almost always have difficulties in phoneme awareness that were not addressed. And such individuals will continue to struggle with reading until this difficulty is addressed. He goes on to say that students who are weak readers are provided with strategies to often work around these weak reading skills. It's assumed that if they have not developed proficient reading by that point, they won't ever develop it. But that's not true. They almost always have difficulties that were never detected or trained. And it's a perfectly correctable cause for their difficulties. And we're unknowingly letting them continue to struggle when we don't address this. He says there's no statute to limitations on the training of phonemic awareness skills when they're weak. And so any student at any age, if they're a poor reader, their phonemic awareness skills should be checked. And not just checked, but addressed if they're not adequate. And this just goes on to reiterate that point, that if it's interfering with reading skills at any age, we want to make sure we're addressing it. So let's get into the fun. You just got comfy. So I want to first kind of go through some of the materials that I use. I'm going to pull away from my screen sharing for a second, just so that I can show you them a little bit bigger. Can you guys see me now? So I've got a variety of manipulatives that I use, anything from little foam blocks, resin blocks, foam squares sometimes. Got my Happy Face Bingo chips. Beads on a pipe cleaner. This is one of my favorites. If you don't have a bag of pipe cleaners, go get one. And Elkonin sound boxes with a variety of shapes and sizes. And I'm going to go into what each of these are as we kind of practice and play around with them. Let me just talk about Elkonin sound boxes first, because that's just, I don't know if I'll get into that quite as much. The basis behind this is that it just gives a structure for what sounds we're going to hear in words. So that way you can set a child up to know what they need to expect, so that then they can fill in the blocks, and all they have to worry about is trying to make sure they're meeting the need. So I have a set with 2 sounds, a set with 3 sounds, and then 4 and 5 sounds. And I usually just fold them based on what I need and have that available so that they can be seen. So Matthew, I'm going to have you do a little demonstration for me. You haven't seen this yet, but I'm going to teach you how to do it so they can see how I would teach it. Let's do 4 sounds. Is it upside down? How's it?
Yeah,
Did it
it's
change
upside down.
still? Oh goodness.
Kind of, if I turn my head to the side, it's almost like it's 90
If it-
degrees.
Distort myself and make myself really uncomfortable. Let's see here. I can change it on my computer, which is what I did, thinking that that would change it for you guys. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to okay. There we go. We're just going to do that for now. Okay, so I'm going to give Matthew 4 poker chips. So don't put them in the boxes yet. Just set them either to the side. You can hold them in your hand if you want, or you can set them down. It's a little bit clunky here with my platform that this is sitting on, so we can't. Sometimes we'll just slide it, but having an extra set of hands is always handy. There we go. Perfect. Okay. So set that up on there so they can see it, and perfect. So I'm going to give Matthew a word, and I want him to sound out this word, and I want him to represent the sounds with each of the poker chips that he has. So Matthew, when you do this, I'm going to give you the word. Tell me the first sound that you hear and just go through the sounds. And as you say a sound, put a chip into the square, okay? So I will often let him know ahead of time that he can expect that each of these words is going to have 4 sounds. So that's why he has 4 blocks and 4 spaces to fill. And that way we just kind of set them up for success so that they're not fumbling. Eventually, we're not going to tell them that, and we're going to start to randomize and mix it up. But to start, we're going to go ahead and give him some of that scaffolding so that all he has to do is pay attention to the sounds he's hearing in words. Okay, so Matthew, your word is, oh, timely. Your word is mask. What sounds do you hear in mask? Beautiful job. Perfect. So Matthew has a coin to represent each of the sounds that he heard. Were you able to hear him and hear the sounds as he put the coin down? Yes. Okay. Okay. And so perfect. So we just want him to apply kind of representing the sound with something tangible. And so that allows him. So basically what we're going to eventually do is we're going to have that tangible piece be a letter that he's either writing or that he is reading. But for now, the token or the poker chip can be something that allows him to kind of grasp and hold on to something and mark it with, and mark those sounds by giving them something to grasp. So that's kind of the purpose of an Elkonin sound box. You can use it, you can have them slide. Sometimes kids have different preferences for what materials they're going to use just based on how it feels, how it works, how it slides. And also sometimes some of the pieces are really distractible. So sometimes finding the piece that is the least exciting and gets them geared more towards doing the task than stacking them or clanking them or playing around with them. Okay. And I'm going to come on back to you here, share my screen.
I have a question, Kirsten.
Yes.
So I noticed that the Elkonin sound boxes were laid out in the direction that we read. And I'm guessing that's really important rather than top down or any other way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So very good point, Rose. So it's laid out in the way that we read, and we want kids to follow that. We want them to follow left to right in that progression, because we just want to get them using that directionality and really following along the way that we're going to expect them to when they are presented with letters. So anytime we're doing anything that's denoting sounds or that's laying it out, we want to follow that left to right progression. So perfect. Great question.
I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if there's an opportunity here for like gross motor movements, or does that kind of get rid of that directionality if you were, say, jumping from box to box?
Yeah, no, that's great. Those are great ideas. So, but again, we want to keep that directionality, getting that movement. I mean, really what we're doing here is trying to key into what's going to stick and what's going to help this click with the kiddo. So sometimes those movement activities can be really great because sometimes they can't sit still, and sometimes it's their body movement that actually helps them learn. Our kiddos with ADHD often have this difficulty that you tell them to sit still in their seat, they're not learning because all they're focusing on is sitting still in their seat. But if we can get them moving around and wiggling or jumping, or, you know, even sometimes we could do, I feel like all of my creativity has been out the window with COVID because I haven't had kiddos in my clinic as much, but I love like putting the Elkonin boxes up on the wall and taking bean bags and chucking it at the wall and seeing if you can hit the different boxes. So, there's a whole variety of things that you can do, tapping it with feet, jumping onto it. I mean, it's really the pieces to see what's going to help it click. And some of those, by incorporating other systems, is going to help those connections get stronger. Let's see, as far as the materials, I don't think I'm going to talk about any more directly at this time, and I'm just going to kind of show you and work through them with you. Okay, so the phonemic focus that we want to have with students with dyslexia. So one of the first that we want to start addressing is isolation. So we want to be able to isolate a sound, pull it off of the word, and be able to know that this is the first sound in a word. This is the last sound in a word. This is the middle sound in a word. So Matthew, are you ready? Okay. Let me do a demonstration. Just speak up so you make sure that they can hear you on this side of the mic, okay? So I'm just going to ask Matthew to tell me the first sound that he hears in the word that I give him. So Matthew, your word is sled. What's the first sound that you hear? Beautiful job. Beautiful job. Now, no time pressure here. We don't want any time pressure, especially initially. He can take as much time as he needs. He can work through it as he needs to. Eventually, we want him processing through it and doing it to where he hardly has to think about it and he can just give it to me. But we want to keep the time pressure off, let him work through it and process it as he needs to. As he's processing these pieces, he's going to develop those connections and make them stronger. Eventually, we want it to become more automatic, but going through those steps is going to be critical for him. Okay, Matthew, now I want you to tell me the last sound that you hear in the word tip.
Huh.
Good job. Beautiful job. So remember on that one, keep it weak. How would you do a weak P sound? You remember that piece? It's okay. It's okay. So what Matthew did is he said puh. That's essentially two sounds. I'm going to get into this after I give some of the demonstrations. But we want to keep our sounds true to their sounds and not add other sounds to it. I know exactly why Matthew is doing that, because he is trying to make it loud so that it can be heard. And that's typically what we do, is we give that to give emphasis to make these weak sounds stronger. But as we're working on these activities, we want to keep it true to the sound all by itself in isolation. So instead of puh, it would just be puh. So just a burst of air coming out of the mouth, no voicing, no sounds coming with that. Now, Matthew, let me have you tell me the last sound that you hear in the word dragon.
Mm.
Beautiful job. Beautiful job. So if you couldn't hear that, that was n. What Matthew did is he sounded out the word to kind of get through it. I could see his mouth moving and him working through that. And that's a great strategy. One thing that we've been working on has been getting him to move beyond that. It takes a lot of work to have to sound out the word all the way through. We want him to be able to just hear it and recognize that final sound and be able to identify it. So what I've been doing with Matthew is I over exaggerate the sound a little bit to make it a little bit more salient, a little bit clearer so that he can hear it stronger. So let's do it again. I'm going to give you another one. Tell me the last sound that you hear, okay? If you have to sound it out, do it. But if you don't, just try and tell me what you hear at the end, okay? So last sound in the word, let's do blanket. Beautiful job. So as I just enunciate that sound a little bit stronger, he can catch it a whole lot easier. It doesn't glide into the word quite as much and it stands out a little bit more. So what I've been doing is I've been going through these words with him. I give it a little bit of extra emphasis, but I've been fading that out with him lately, and he's really been holding to that. Now, a couple things that I want to touch on here that are really some factors that we want to take into account with any of these sound activities is we want to address all of the positions in the word. So so the sound at the beginning of the word, so the initial position, the sound at the end of the word in the final position, and the sound in the middle of the word, the medial position. All of these are important places to address, and we want to make sure we're hitting all of them. So as I did it with Matthew, I went through, we did the first sound, we did the last sound. The initial sound is typically the easiest sound for kids to work with in just about all capacities. So in speech production, as speech pathologists, that's what we do. We, as we address making sounds in words and putting that together and building up articulation, we find that the initial sound is usually the easiest. Not always, but usually. But also in these phonemic awareness tasks, that holds true as well through each of these pieces. Final sounds tend to be the next easiest, and medial sounds or sounds in the middle of words are the hardest usually for kids. So some other factors that we want to look at are the number of sounds that are in a word. So the less number of sounds, the less they have to work through and less to process. So those tend to be easier. The more sounds you put into a word, that builds up the complexity and makes it that much more challenging. The number of syllables that we have in words. Typically, when I'm doing phonemic awareness tasks, I'm typically working only on single syllables. As I get kiddos into building multiple syllable words, then we start addressing the syllables and we start talking about how those pieces go together. But essentially, if a child can take a syllable, a single syllable that has 5, maybe 6, but usually 5 is kind of the magic number I shoot for. 5 sounds in a single syllable. And if they can do these pieces with those words, they can pretty much work through any word, no matter how many syllables it comes down to, because all we need to do then is work on breaking the syllables apart. And once we break the syllables apart, we fall back on these earlier skills that we've built up. Now we can take a syllable. There are very few syllables that have more than 5 sounds in them. Some have 6. I think the most that is even possible is 7, but it's not very common. So if they can do 5 pretty consistently, then they're going to be really well set up to work even into those multiple syllable words. But again, for the sake of addressing it, you're really getting them that solid foundation just by simply doing a single syllable word and building up the number of sounds in that word. As far as syllable structure, so we talk about syllable structure by how consonants and vowels play into words. Now, we have 5 vowel letters, A, E, I, O, and U. All the other letters are considered consonants. There are 14 vowel sounds in the English language. So makes it pretty challenging that we have to figure out how to make 14 sounds with 5 letters. And unfortunately, even with that task on top of it, we have other languages that pull in, that influence us. And we don't even stay consistent within the patterns that we make to get that one sound. So the vowel structure is pretty complex and can be frustrating. But within the syllable structure, what we're really looking for is how the consonants and the vowels line up next to each other. So if a consonant and then a vowel and then a consonant come together, that's that's one of the more simple combinations. When we start to put consonants next to each other, we call those blends, and those get pretty tricky for kids to work through. And so that vowel going in between to break up the syllable bunch really is helpful. And when we don't have that, kiddos tend to struggle more. So when we see some blends coming in, especially in phonemic awareness tasks, that can be even more challenging for kids to hear the distinction and how those sounds break up into two distinct words, because they tend to kind of stick and slide together. Some other pieces that I really look at when I address phonemic awareness is the idea of blocked practice. So that's where everything is consistent. I don't change any factors. So I'm going through and I'm only asking Matthew to tell me the first sound in a word. It's always the first sound in a word. But then once he gets really solid at that, then I'm going to go on and do blocked practice with the last sound in a word, get him really solid with that. When he's really solid there, I'm going to start mixing him up on him and asking him to tell me the first sound in this word, the last sound in this word, the last sound in this word, the first sound in this word, and really randomize it. That's going to keep him on his toes, and he can't get used to any consistent pattern. So that's where it gets more challenging, is when you move from blocked practice into the intermixed or randomized practice. And then the speed of presentation is a factor as well. So I always start by giving kids as much time as they need to process. So like I said, that's how our connections get made, by letting them work through the steps they need. But then we're going to start moving them into that automaticity piece, where their processing speed can get shorter and shorter. And I start doing that by, as soon as they give me a word, as soon as they give me the rest of the word, I give them a new word. And I call it rapid fire. As soon as it's just kind of an activity I go through, and I tell them, you take as much time as you need, but I change myself and how I present it to them. And so I let them take the time they need, go through the steps they need to do that. But then I start giving it to them faster, and I start coming ready with the next one as soon as they give me the next one. And that helps start to build their processing speed, because then they're having to work through it a little bit faster, even though they can use the skills that they need to build up into it. So, sorry, kind of a lot to go through there. Let's get into some more demonstration, but that I wanted to kind of talk through that, because the first sound that I gave to Matthew, or the first word, was sled. Was that the first word I gave you? Mm-hmm. The first word I gave him was sled. So now that's going to be a trickier word than just saying a word like maybe tip, because we're starting with a consonant blend. We're starting with an S and an L, and he has to piece that apart to realize that the first sound is not sl, it's s, and he did it beautifully. So I moved from that into a final sound. So I changed my position in the word to a final sound, and I asked him to tell me the last sound in the word dragon. Now, that's a pretty challenging task to start with. That's not where we start. That's where we're working on right now. I'm asking him now to take a 2-syllable word, work all the way through it to the end, and tell me the last sound after a bundle of a lot of other words. He worked through it beautifully. His segmenting skills are excellent now. He went through every one of them in dragon, d, a, g, n, I, n, to figure out that n was the last sound. But that's a lot of work. What he's doing is, from getting here to here, he's not going like this. He's going like this. So we want to get that path straighter and more direct for him. And that's what we've been doing by over enunciating that sound. So when I gave him that next example of blanket, I made that t stronger so that he could hear it and it would stand out to him. And by doing that, his path got really straight. He told me that right away. So then what I want to do is just gradually back off on that to where he doesn't need to hear it quite as strong. It still might be stronger than I would say it in conversation, but we're going to back it down until he is, until he's starting to recognize it without having to segment all the way through to get there. So now let's do a quick example with a medial sound. So Matthew, your word is feet. What is the sound in the middle of the word feet?
E.
Beautiful. Nicely said, E. Okay, so again, I'm not going to show you lots of those because I think I have other things I'd rather show you more in depth. But with isolation, essentially what we're doing, we can take 1 or 2 or more syllable words. We can talk about what the first sound is, what the last sound is, what the middle sound is, and we can build and work through that. I'm trying to think. That's pretty much the progression for how I build up with that. With any of these, if you guys have specific examples, I'm happy to talk about them later on. If it's beneficial to the group, I'm happy to talk about them now or within the presentation. But if it's something that would just be helpful to kind of run a few ideas by, I'm happy to do that at another point too. Are there any questions about isolation or anything I presented up to this point?
I don't have any in the chat box, but if anybody has any, you're welcome to unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm going to take silence as the go ahead. Okay, so now we're going to talk about segmenting. So segmenting is essentially pulling apart every sound that you hear in a word. I am going to stop sharing my screen for a minute.
One quick question, Kirsten.
Yeah.
How much time should a session be?
It's a great question. And that is probably, there's a lot of debate around that. It depends on what your goals are. It depends on what you're trying to address. It depends on what your parameters are within your setting. It depends on your child's attention span and their learning capacity. I have found that typically, especially when I'm really hammering in phonological awareness skills, I found that 45 minutes is kind of my magic number. Sometimes I find that kiddos tap out by about 30 minutes because this work is really pretty intensive and it's tapping into something that's really, really hard for them. Other kids, especially as the skills start to build, I find that an hour could be good. But I find that 45 minutes typically meets them at a really good spot to where I can drill them, and I drill them hard. I push them to, my goal is I always try and push them to the point that I know they're capable of. I try and give them as much help as they need, but I give them as little help as they need. So I'm there to support them, and I've got supports to put in place when they need it. But if they don't need it, they're working through it. And so I try to really balance that level of not pushing to the point of frustration. And so I step in before that point, if I can identify it, and give them support before that point. But then I also try and keep them challenged enough so that they have to work through it and push. So 45 minutes, really doing this intensively can be a lot sometimes for kiddos. And so I find that that's, if phonemic awareness is really the focus and you're really hammering into it, I find that that's a good amount of time. But again, there's, other people there's some other ideas, but sometimes with this, if you're going to go longer, sometimes kids need breaks and they need a chance to kind of sit back. I also find that by doing 45 minutes, it gives enough to get the learning process. And then they need a little bit of time to kind of decompress and soak it in. So again, there's a lot of different thoughts and ideas on it. There's a lot of factors that really play into it. So I don't think there's a magic answer, but that's kind of what I found to be the most effective. 45 minutes, how many days a week? I just saw that come in. So that can also be variable. And I really base that based on severity of the child's difficulties. What I tend to do is I try and show parents this as much as I can. I try and show people who are working with the child as much as I can. COVID has made that a lot more challenging. Prior to COVID, I always had parents in my clinic and in my room and sitting here with me. Now I'm seeing kiddos remotely. And there's so much going on that's not always as feasible. I would say ideally having the parents available. I know that's not as feasible for schools, but as much as you can get the information to the parents and to other supporters of the child, the better. And so what I really suggest is, I usually do 1 or 2 days a week in the clinic, and then I give activities of what we've been working on to take home to do as many days as possible. I usually recommend 4 or 5 days a week. So that way there is consistent follow through. There is, they get the time with me to really learn it and hash through it, but then they get the time to soak it in and absorb it and practice it as the week goes on. And then when they come back to me, we see where they're at, if we need to continue to teach it, or if we're able to start backing off on supports that are given or adjusting kind of how the skills are set up. And then I provide that information to parents so that they can follow along with that throughout the week. But again, that's not, in the school system, that's not as feasible. The parents aren't as available to help support through this. There's a lot of other factors that play in all of these pieces. So again, not a magic answer. And that is a piece that is up for a variety of debate based on what you have available. Okay, any other questions at this point?
Owen. So this is a foundational skill. Would you recommend that people focus on this one skill in reading remediation, or like lots of skills?
I think again, there's different factors to take into account, and based on the settings and based on what else is going on. What I tend to do is I tend to start with this alone. And I'll get into a little bit further too, hopefully, how kind of the letters play in and how we can kind of start to work on some phonics targets at the same time, or kind of simultaneously in different activities. But if there is the capacity to take some time to intensively work on phonemic awareness first, before you jump into other reading skills, I think you're going to have the best success. Kids need to have that foundation to be able to stack upon it. Phonics skills are hard to build when they don't know how sounds play into words. So again, there's factors that limit that ability, but when I work with kids, sometimes I work as long as 6 months before we do anything different. It's not always that long. It really depends on the severity of the child, but sometimes all we're doing, I haven't introduced the letter or anything else at that point. All I'm doing is working on the sounds. And sometimes I even have to train them away from the letter because it can get too muddy if they're paying attention to the letter, that they can't pay attention to the sound. Okay. Hopefully that helps.
One more question, Kirsten.
Okay.
Do you use or recommend, excuse me, clay or Play-Doh to make letters and then attach the sounds to the letters they make?
I do eventually, not in phonemic awareness. So that is actually a phonics task. As soon as you start bringing in the letters, you're talking about phonics. So any tasks related to phonemic awareness, you can do with your eyes closed. A phonemic awareness task is only auditory. It's only listening and paying attention to the sounds you hear in words. So I do recommend that, and that's a fantastic task. And that's actually my next step. Playing with Play-Doh, doing that thing, molding and shaping and creating the letters is a fantastic activity. And then what you're doing is you're then taking the sound that they now have the awareness of, and you're attaching it to the letter. So then you're making that correlation. Okay, how am I going to take this to the next step? So going through the letters at that point, after they have the sound basis, then you can start building in, and then you can start applying and attaching letters and building up in your phonics and reading skills. But until they really understand the sounds in the words and how the sounds play into words, it's the phonics piece is I wouldn't say a losing battle, but I would say it's a really slow race. And so I see things really start to pick up with the letter pieces once that phonological awareness and phonemic awareness is established. Does that help?
I think
Okay.
so.
Oh yeah, it helps. Thank you.
So I'm going to move on in the interest of time, so to make sure that we can go through more of these pieces to show you guys. Let's see, Matthew, I am going to enlist your help. Oh, you can sit right there. Okay, so going back to our Elkonin sound boxes, this is one option. You guys are you guys seeing the Elkonin sound box? Perfect.
Could
Okay.
you move it a little bit to the
I'm actually going to take it away.
okay.
I
Yeah.
just want to make sure that we're looking at the same thing. Perfect. That's super helpful. Let me just okay. So the Elkonin soundbox is a great level of structure that provides the kiddo with the pieces that they need to know what they're putting into place, and all they have to focus on is the sound. But now we're going to take the next step, and we're going to take that away. So again, you can use anything from foam blocks, acrylic blocks, or fancy poker chips, anything you want to work through this, but it really depends on your preference, the kiddo's preference. And I mean, sometimes I use Legos, sometimes I use coins. I mean, anything works. Something small and movable is great. Fingers are great too. You always have them on you. You can always use them to count. And most syllables don't have more than 5 sounds. So you're pretty well equipped. I'm going to take it, okay, I'm going to move you from the Elkonin sound box into some segmenting activities, and I'm going to take you to a different manipulative you can use to do the same task. Okay, so Matthew, let's start out with 2 sounds. So what I do is we start out with the smallest combination and of words. So it's going to be 2 sounds. So I'm going to ask Matthew to tell me all the sounds that he hears in the word that I give him. And I want him to put a coin down for each sound that he hears. Okay, so Matthew, your word is saw. What sounds do you hear in the word saw? Perfect. Move it over just a little bit. There we go. Beautiful. Okay, so he was doing it left to right. My camera's upside down. So saw. Perfect. And now let's slide them back together. What's the word?
Saw.
Perfect. Okay, now Matthew did that so nicely. We're going to move into 3 sounds. Usually what I'll do is I'll do about 5 to make sure that they can do it effectively and consistently. If they get 5 out of 5 and they're rocking it, even 4 out of 5 if they're really nailing it and it's just a subtle difference, then I might move on to another sound. Anything less than 4, like 80% or so, I'm not going to move on yet. Okay, Matthew, your next word is foot. What sounds do you hear in the word foot? Perfect. There we go. And t. Now slide it back together. What's the word?
Foot.
Perfect. Okay, now your word, we're going to bump up. He did that really nicely. He had it down. Now we're going to bump up to 4 sounds. Now this is going to be a big change because we're moving. 3 sounds often has a consonant, vowel, consonant, that nice breakup that we like to see. 4 sounds, we can only have 1 vowel in a syllable, so we're bound to have a blend sneak in here. So Matthew, your word is flip. What sounds do you hear?
Yeah.
Perfect. Slide it all together.
Flip.
Perfect. Okay, now for this next one, keep the 2 consonants together. Okay, so now I'm going to have Matthew pretend for me a little bit. Matthew, your word is clap. What sounds do you hear?
Cool.
This probably isn't fair. I'm teaching you bad habits. Perfect. So he said clap. We have 4 sounds in the word clap. He gave me 3. He has 3 coins there. Nope, don't put that on there. You didn't say it. So he has 3 sounds or 3 coins, but there are 4 sounds in that word. He told me cull. So Matthew, cull is 2 sounds. What 2 sounds do you hear? Oh, stop. I like it. Okay, so let's put those all together and see if we hear our word. So we've got tap. Is that the word I gave you? No. So let's work through it now. What sounds did you hear in coal? Beautiful, beautiful job. So perfect. I want to present it back to him what he gave me so that he can start building his awareness. He can start training himself to make those adjustments and figure out what wasn't quite right and what he needs to do to make it right. So that was perfect. So we changed that t into a p. So now we've got, we changed that t to an ol. So now I've got k, ol, a, p. Slide it together.
Clap.
Beautiful. Okay, now I'm going to bring them into 5 sounds. And 5 sounds are, they're going to bring us into some 2-syllable words sometimes too. Okay, your word here is magic. What sounds do you hear in the word magic?
Magic.
Beautifully done. Super smooth, very distinct. We want to make sure these kiddos are making those super distinct. We don't want sounds to think, are they sliding together or are they really pulling them apart? So sometimes I have kiddos really over exaggerate and say, give me more of a pause in there. I want to hear those sounds all by themselves because sometimes they're doing it to try and cover up. They try and keep sliding to make sure that they're kind of getting in what they need. Okay, I'm going to give you a second and I'm going to show something a little bit different. Here's another one. This is one of my favorite manipulatives for segmenting. So that kind of gives you an example of how we move from using the Elkonin box with the structure of the boxes to just using the tokens and something to place to represent. I really, really love beads on a pipe cleaner. There's a lot of recommendations you might see for like beads on a string. Strings are too flimsy. Pipe cleaners you can hold in your hand and they don't fall out. You don't have to have a table to set it down on, so it's really handy. I usually put 5 beads on a pipe cleaner and just have them ready for the kiddo. If we're just doing 2 sounds, we slide the rest off to the side and we've got our 2 sounds. What I really like about this is like I was saying before, how we have our, sometimes kiddos have to identify that there's actually sounds that are the words that go into sentences and it's not one long string. That goes the same for words. So sometimes they think that a word is just one big chunk and they don't identify that there's all these little pieces that go into words. So I like to use that to demonstrate this if they need it, to say, we can take this and this can be our word and it can be a whole. We can put all these pieces together and that can be our word and it's just there all together. But what we can also do is we can peel all the pieces apart and make them very separate and distinct. So, but we could also take apart syllables and make them chunks of sounds. We can do all kinds of things. And then we can also have this correlate to our sentences where we have a word that's represented by a piece of, by a bead. So lots of different ways we can talk about how these different pieces can break apart and pull back together. So take, for example, so what I'll often do is kind of similar to what I was doing with Matthew with the coins is sometimes I just have it on here so that they don't have to hold as much, they don't have to manipulate as much, all they have to do is hold this. So sometimes what I'll do for the same idea of the Elkonin sound box is I'll tell them, okay, this word's only gonna have 2 sounds. So break it down, just give yourself 2 beads. So your word is go. What sounds do you hear in go? And help them realize that this is one sound and this is the other. And our space in between is the pause and the quiet that we should hear to make sure that it's super distinct. So g, o. If they really don't want to pull these apart and they're having a hard time, I ask them to make the gap bigger. And just by seeing that, that can help them, give them some visualization to understand that, that there needs to be that separation. And then we can take 3 sounds here and we can talk about the word dog. Our sounds in dog are d, ah, and g. We can take 4 sounds, add another one on. Our word is flip, f, o, I, p. And then we can also just give them all 5 and we can say, okay, your word is go. What sounds do you hear? G, o. Okay, how many sounds did you get? You have 2. And they have a way to keep track so that they can count and identify and kind of pay attention. So a lot of different ways that you can use this pipe cleaner. I love it for segmenting, especially. Some of our other activities, especially the manipulation activities, I like using blocks or loose pieces a little bit more because you're taking sounds off, you're putting sounds on, you're moving sounds around, and doesn't work on the linear fashion as well. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, so we talked about segmenting these pieces all, or the number of syllables, the number of sounds, the syllable structure, those each apply as well. Next is blending, so essentially doing the opposite. So we're just gonna do this verbally, so I'm gonna let you listen to Matthew. I'm gonna give you sounds. I want you to put the sounds together to tell me what word I'm making, okay? So, again, we can start with 2, we can build up, and we can just kind of meet the child where they're at with the number that we notice is where they start to struggle. So we're going to start with 3 sounds. So Matthew, your sounds are b, a, g. What's the word?
Bag.
Good. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll just let them respond to me just like that. Other times I will ask them to repeat the sounds after me. So I make sure that they're hearing them exactly how I say them. It kind of depends on the kiddo. I just kind of, I ebb and flow based on how they've been doing. But sometimes they're not hearing the sounds correctly. And so that's part of the problem. So sometimes they get a different sound in mind, then they put it together and the word's wrong. So sometimes I like to have them repeat it after me so that I make sure that what I'm giving to them, they're taking in and using, and then they can slide it together. It can also be helpful in that sometimes they're getting a little bit more reinforcement and a little bit more feedback by hearing their own voice and hearing themselves say the sounds. Matthew is really, really good at this task. He doesn't need to do that. And he's very, very clear. He has been from the start. It's been pretty impressive. We had some pretty bad sound quality initially when we first started our visits. And this kid could hear some of these sounds through muffles and bad sound quality and all kinds of things. And he was nailing it. So, so I haven't asked the same of him, but that is a consideration to have with some kiddos. Okay, let's do another one. Let's do 5 sounds. So Matthew, hear your sounds. Tell me what word it's going to make. T, a, m, b, o.
Tumble.
Beautiful job. Beautiful. Nailed it. All right. So am I still sharing my screen again? So that was blending. With blending, if again, we want to meet the kiddo where they're at with the number of sounds. 2 might be as many as they can do at first. And then what we might do is we might start adding another and building up the words as they're able to work with it. But what I usually do if they're having trouble with those, what I do is called backwards chaining. So what we'll do is we will take pieces and put them together and then start putting those pieces together and kind of chain them, link them together like a chain. So say the word was rabbit and Matthew really struggled. What we might do is we might take the syllables. So we might take a, put that together.
Rat.
Oh,
Rat.
so a.
Rat.
And b, it.
Bit.
Perfect. Now we can take those 2 syllables and join them together. Rabbit, put it together.
Rabbit.
Beautiful job. So by taking those pieces and those chunks, it can simplify it a little bit enough that sometimes they can keep up with it and then build back into those bigger words. Okay, let's get into some of the fun. The manipulation tasks are my favorite because they're kind of like word puzzles. We're starting to get tight on time. I want to make sure that I get this addressed. Are there any questions up to this point?
Nothing in the chat.
Cool. Okay. Sorry?
Go ahead. I'm sorry. We did have one pop up, but you go ahead and we'll catch it on the next one.
Perfect. Okay. So with sound manipulation activities, I will often start by giving them manipulatives and showing them how it can work together. Okay. So I'm going to have Matthew demonstrate because he's getting really quite good at this. Usually what I will do is I will show the child first and kind of put the pieces down. But I'm going to talk him through it and I'm going to have him show you because the camera's on him right now. So we're going to start with addition. So, so Matthew, your word is, now addition, you can go a number of ways. Sometimes kids do better by sounding out all the pieces, being aware of what all the individual pieces are, and then adding a sound onto all those pieces. Sometimes they do better holding the word as a chunk. So what I'll do is I'll show them my fist, and then I will put a flat hand up in front of it if it's the beginning sound, and I'll show them that the fist is the word they started with, the flat hand is the sound we're adding, and then we just push it together. But sometimes they do better by segmenting it first, adding that sound on, and then sliding it together. So I'm going to have Matthew show you that. Okay, so our word is lock. Sound out lock with the block or with the coins.
Oh. Oh.
Beautiful. So he has a lock down there. Now at the beginning, I want you to add a b to the beginning.
Block.
Perfect, perfect. So what he did, he sounded out, he got all the pieces he had from the starter word, lock, ul, k. I gave him the b to add to it. He put it in the front and he slid it all together, blended it essentially to figure out that the word is block. So another one, let's do another one real quick. I'm gonna have you do this without the manipulatives just because you're, to show kind of how we can do it and kind of the speed we wanna start to get to. Your word is lap. So say it for me, sorry, lap.
Lap.
Now add a k to the beginning.
Clap.
Beautiful job, beautiful. That's just what I want. I typically want to see about 1 to 2 seconds where he might have a little hesitation, but he's pretty much nailing it. We want to get this to where he's automatic. He hardly has to think about it. But we want to break it down as much as he needs to in order for him to be successful. We want him successful most of the time. So by doing that, we need to give support in order for him to be successful. And then we need to gradually back off on the support. If you don't have support, you crumble, you become frustrated, you give up. So let's give our kiddos support in these activities so that they can learn how to do them, make their ways through it, and we gradually pull off the supports as they're able to stand on their own. Okay, now I'm going to have you add a sound to the end of the word. So we're just going to bounce through our positioning. So we did beginning sound, now we're going to do end sound. So your word is goal.
Goal.
Now add a d to the end.
Gold.
Beautiful, gold. Awesome. Okay, now we're going to add a sound into the middle of the word. This is our trickiest spot. So your word is wrap. Add an after the a.
Ramp.
Oh, beautiful job. Okay, if Matthew couldn't have done that, let's show you what he would have done. Your word is pat. Sound it out with your blocks. We're going to pretend he gave me something different. We're going to talk through this. Okay, so you've got pat, at. Okay, now touch the a. Okay, after the a, add in a s. What sounds do you have?
Pass.
Don't forget about this one.
What was it again?
Yeah, good question. So the word is pat, and you added a s after the a.
Past.
Beautiful job. Perfect. Okay, so Matthew's moved beyond that point. Now going back to it, it's more work because I'm making you really think through it. He's become really automatic with it. He doesn't need to go to that point, but in building him up, that can be really, really helpful. Awesome job working through that. Okay, now I don't have my slideshow up. I'm just going to keep it here so we can see, but I'm going to move to deletion tasks. So essentially deletion tasks are where we delete a sound. We take a sound away either from the beginning, the middle, or the end. Let's start with the beginning because that's usually the easiest. So Matthew, your word is, let's do gate. Take off the first sound.
Eight.
Beautiful. Perfect. Okay. Now, if you were to have trouble with that, Matthew was doing it in his head. I could see him kind of working through it. He was sounding it out. He was going through the sounds. He's gotten really good at holding them in his mind. So he can use it and he can work through what I would have him do with the manipulatives in his head. He doesn't need those. But it can be really helpful for some kids because sometimes they have working memory issues or they have harder times holding on to the sounds in order to manipulate them and do something with it. So, so I'm going to have you do that. So if he were to struggle with one of these words, I'd say, okay, sound out the word feet.
Eat.
Okay, if it was, so do it with your manipulatives. You're fine.
Eat.
Beautiful. Okay, so you've got eat. I want you to take off the first sound. What is the first sound? Good. Take it off. What do you have left?
Eat.
Perfect. If he wasn't remembering that, I might remind him and I might say, okay, so you had eat. What is your first sound? Take that off. Okay, now you have eat. Now slide it together. What do you have left? And that can just pull in that blending part. So it can be really helpful for the segmenting and the blending to be established before you really jump into manipulation, because oftentimes you use that as a fallback to help support them in building this up. Okay, now we're gonna take off the last sound. So your word is, let's do shelf. Perfect. Okay, what is the last sound in the word shelf? Beautiful. Take it off. And what do you have left?
Elf.
Ooh, you took off the first sound. So you took off the sh, which is our first sound. Let's keep that on there.
Shell.
Yes. That was is the last time you took that off. You had sh, left. Put that together. What is it?
Shell.
Beautiful job. Okay. So now let's take out a sound in the middle. This is the trickiest. Okay, your word is belt.
Belt.
Take out the O.
Bet.
Nicely done. Beautiful job. Okay, so that in itself is essentially deletion. We just kind of move around. Again, we start with blocked practice where it's always the first sound, and we just do lots of activities where they're just getting the first sound down. Then we move to the final sound. We're moving through it where they really get the last sound down, and then we move into the middle. Once they have the word, that ability to do that skill in each of those positions, then we're going to start mixing it up. So I might say, want to try it? Okay, let's give it a shot. Okay, so your word is, let's do lip.
Ooh. Yeah.
I'm going to back you up because I got into an addition task. Let's keep them all deletions since you were doing that. Okay, so let's do cord is your word.
Or.
Good. Okay, I want you to take off the last sound.
Core.
Good. Okay, now your word is box. Okay, take off the first sound.
Box.
Beautiful job. Okay, now your word is task.
Task.
Okay, now take out this.
Tech.
Beautiful job. Nicely done. So I'm really keeping him on his toes. He can't get used to, it's always going to be the first sound. It's always going to be the last sound. He has to bump around and move and catch me where I tell him to take off that sound. Beautiful, beautiful job. Okay, so now I'm not gonna, I don't think I'm gonna go into the last two because they're very similar and the strategies are very similar. I wanna make sure I just get through the end of the pieces because I just have some tips and tricks to make sure you're accounting for. Basically, the other two are so we then, so deletion is accounted for. Substitution is next, where you have a child switch out a sound. So you take the first sound, maybe the word is hot, and you switch the first sound, change it to a p to make pot. Or you might switch the last sound. So your word is hop, switch the last sound to a t to make hot. So different ways that you can kind of play around with that just by switching sounds to a sound that you give them. And the last is called transposition. This is a little bit trickier than each of these others, and I addressed this last. It's where you give the child a word and you ask them to switch the first and the last sound around. So, so basically, if you were to say the words cat, switch the first and the last sound. So you're going to switch the k and the t. You're going to change it, and you're going to get word tack. So all of those give a whole variety of ways to play around with words. By the time they've gone through each of these pieces, they can take sounds and they can change them around. They can move them. They can know exactly what sounds go into words, and they're set up and ready to read and start applying those letters. Now, this is from David Kilpatrick's book. It is, it's the Essentials for Assessing Overcoming Reading Difficulties, I believe it's called. It talks through some of the stages that you can use to support kiddos. It's pretty little here. I will, again, I'll send you these slides, but it basically goes from the easiest to the most challenging of tasks and the ways that you can provide support to make it easier into more challenging. The easiest is to give them letter and sound cues and show them how the letters and sounds play in, and they can use the letters essentially as their cues. Again, when we do that, that's a phonics task. It's not a phonological awareness task. All we're doing is we're taking that to help them make better sense of sounds because that doesn't make sense to them right now. So we're helping them take something that might make some sense and apply it. But eventually we want to phase that out. The next is to use tokens and manipulatives like I was doing with Matthew. Then we can do clapping or tapping or just using our fingers instead of having the manipulatives. Then we can just do it by stretching or repeating the words for kids so that they have a little bit more saliency in that they've heard it again, but they don't have manipulatives to use and to work through it. They're doing it all in their mind. And then eventually we want them to manipulate the sounds and work through the sounds totally verbally and without the use of any external manipulatives. And once they've done that, then we say that they've mastered it and they become automatic, which is our ultimate goal. So now the question of, is it phonemic awareness or is it phonics? We kind of talked through that if your eyes are closed, it's phonemic awareness. If you're using your eyes to look at letters, it's phonics. Phonological awareness instruction does have the greatest impact when it's integrated at some point, is what is clarified, with the learning of letters and written words. That's from the National Reading Panel. But so eventually we do want to show that connection. We do want to show how they interconnect and correlate. But initially we want to take it just down to the sound level where they're only working on sounds and aren't applying those letters yet. Phonemic awareness is not required for correct responses to tasks and activities that use letters. While letters or tokens can be used in the early stages of phonological awareness training, skilled phonological awareness is displayed by instant, oral only responding to phonological awareness prompts. Because letters are being displayed, these are actually phonics activities and not phonological awareness activities. A student can correctly respond using their letter sound knowledge, and they may not develop their phonemic awareness. So take care in using letters. If students have basic letter sound knowledge, they can use it to illustrate the task and show them how to make it more graspable, easier to grasp. But we don't want to stay there, and that's not, if they can do it with letters, we're not saying that they can do it. If the teacher only uses letters that mimic phonological awareness tasks, it is quite possible that the student will not develop phonemic awareness. I had a student that I saw this morning who really struggles most significantly with spelling. He's in junior high and spelling is really challenging for him. We started doing some phonemic awareness activities and we got into some manipulation activities and he was nailing them. This is the first time I've seen him, by the way, since our evaluation. So he then he was going through them and he was pulling sounds off of the words like nothing. And I was like, dang, he is really getting this. I thought that this was more challenging for him. And then we got to the word coughs. And he stopped and he worked. And he sounded out, he said, ah. And then he told me, he said, I don't know how to spell coughs. And I said, well, that's your problem. You're relying on your letters. You are trying to do a task that's foundational for spelling, and you're using spelling to do it, but yet spelling is your presenting problem and where you struggle the most. So what I had to explain to him is that because it was an irregular spelling, it wasn't something that was easily decodable, he couldn't work his way through it because what he was doing is he was saying, okay, it's a C, it's an O, because I hear the K and the ah, and applying the letter to the sound to give me the sounds I wanted to hear. But when he got to where he didn't know the letters for them, he couldn't move any further and he couldn't tell me what sounds there. So I said, okay, well, why don't you just sound it out? Listen to the sounds you hear. He couldn't do it. He said, well, it kind of sounds like there's a V. It kind of sounds like there's an S or a Z. I said, yeah, it's because there's a blend there. They're sliding together and they're not really clear and distinct. We need to make them distinct for you so that you can know exactly what sound is in the word, and then you can apply the letter to it to spell. But when you're using your weakness to do a task that's foundational for your weakness, we've got a problem. So he has never learned phonological awareness, and he's using his letters to manipulate that he can do it, because I thought for sure he got 3 out of 3 initially, and then we got to coughs and he couldn't do it. Sorry, I know we're getting tight on time. Responding correctly to phonological awareness activities using non-lettered tokens should be viewed as a step along the continuum, but not to the level of proficiency that is needed to develop orthographic mapping. That's really essential, taking those letter patterns and recognizing that they regularly represent a consistent sound, or sight word learning. And again, they can be used as tasks initially, but eventually we want to kind of back off, and eventually we want to correlate our letter sound knowledge with the sound knowledge that we've built, but we want to build that sound knowledge first. Okay. Let me see how we're doing on time. Are there any questions right now, real quickly?
We do have a question, Kirsten.
Okay.
How many of your students have a history of phonological processing or oral language production? And what would you recommend to monitor such students to minimize the risk of later reading problems? Do you ever have a student with inconsistent phonological errors? For example, they may say, they don't have apraxia, but they may say capillar for caterpillar.
Mm-hmm.
So not specific to an articulation error.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, that's pretty indicative of some phonological processing difficulties. It's often, especially with those multiple syllable words, you hear speech production breakdown. They can usually hold it together on the shorter words with a less complex syllable structure. But as you get into those bigger words, they start to fall apart, even if they can make all the sounds pretty routinely on their own or in small combinations. But that is a great question. I mean, that can lead into, again, a whole nother topic, which I'd be happy to address at some point. But yeah, so both articulation difficulties as a child and language difficulties as a child, both are risk factors for dyslexia. And so any of the kiddos that are seen in like a speech and language clinic, it is helpful to monitor and to do some screening to make sure a lot of these phonological awareness activities can really well be implemented too into some articulation activities that are being done already, so that they're not just building articulation skills, but they're also building phonemic awareness as well at the same time, and without a whole lot of extra effort and work. So that's something I'd be happy to address at another point as well, or if someone wants to reach out to me. I have my email at the end of this. In the interest of time, I am going to leave you with these. A lot of these I've addressed to an extent, but it's just kind of some bullet points for some good pieces to be aware of. If anyone has additional questions, you're always welcome to reach out to me. And so if there's something you want more information on or a deeper explanation, please just contact me. Again, here's some more strategies and things to be aware of. And then these are some activity ideas that you can kind of play in with. Again, some of these I did address, the Elkonin sound boxes. You can use like different word lists, articulation packs if you're a speech pathologist. Hangman, if you want to play hangman, you can, instead of writing dashes for the number of letters that you'd put, you can write dashes for the numbers of sounds, and they can fill in that way as they sound out words. And then just a few other kind of ideas here that you can just kind of take a peek at. Some more activities using sound-loaded books. Literacy Speaks is a great site for different sound-loaded books. So this can be great for parents at home, for teachers, for speech pathologists, anything along the line to jump in. They just have letters, and you just go in. You can find tons and tons of books and different activities based around that sound, so kids can really get used to that. You know, this first sound in a word is common, and all these sounds start with M or sound, and then they can get used to building some of those isolation skills. And then I have some resources here. So a book I really like is Equipped for Reading Success by David Kilpatrick. The first half of it is kind of textbook, where it explains phonological awareness and phonemic awareness and its importance and how to kind of look for it. And then the back half is a workbook with different activities, kind of like what I showed you with Matthew, especially manipulation activities that you can go through. The Literacy Speaks page is right here that goes to the alphabet pages and sound pages. This Reading Mama has some really great activities and free printables and that kind of thing. Again, Get Ready to Read is a kindergarten readiness screener. So that's an idea that can be good for parents at home, as well as for kiddos that are older than kindergarten, just to see some of those pre-literacy skills. And one site I really like is the Florida Center for Reading Research. The student center activities are broken up by grade level. And they also have, they have phonemic awareness tasks and just activities you can print out, and the materials are there right there for you. So that's great for teachers. It's great for parents to kind of practice and play along with at home. They give you instructions. There's a teacher's guide kind of on how to kind of get it going. But they go up through grade level. It includes phonemic awareness and phonics and vocabulary and all the skills that you need for reading. So it's not just phonemic awareness, but it can really help guide you into something specific. And then a variety of other sites down there that have further information or activities that you can just grab and go. And then this was from my previous slide, from my previous presentation, but I want to make sure you had it. So again, some screening tools and activities, some intervention materials, and some other cards and things you can play around with and use. And again, I always run out of time because it's such a big topic, but this is just a drop in the bucket, and I'm happy to continue conversations or talk about it further with anyone interested. And here's my email address, and I just appreciate your time and listening. Whew, sorry.
Thank you, Kirsten. No, I think it was amazing. Lots of great information. As you said, there's never enough time to really share all that you have to share about how to support these students. So thank you for your time tonight, Kirsten. Thank you everyone for joining. If you have any questions, let's stay on for a quick minute. Feel free to unmute yourself, and any of the questions in the chat box have all been addressed. So if there's any questions at all, you are welcome to unmute, and we can have a quick minute of just open interaction. Leslie, yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Kirsten, I just want you to know that you have been really marvelous with a couple of the kids. I have several dyslexics in my class this year, and I've had a couple of parents. One went to a psychologist and one came to you. And the information that I got from your paperwork was so much helpful for me as the teacher, knowing what he could do and what he couldn't do, and for the parent knowing what he could do and what he couldn't do, as compared to the information we got from the psychologist. I'm sure he's a great psychologist, but just that informational piece was so much more helpful for us to make a plan going forward. So thank you very much.
Awesome. I sure appreciate your feedback. That's why I'm doing this. My goal is not just to give a diagnosis. My goal is to help parents and teachers and anyone touching this child to figure out what is next and what can we do about it. And so if you have any feedback or anything else you'd like to see that would be helpful, I'm definitely open to that, because I'm always trying to adjust. But I do appreciate that, and the fact that it's helpful information and that it's something functional, because without the what's next and what to do about it, I feel like it's just a diagnosis. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Keep it up.
Thanks. Will do.
Anyone else want to chime up or ask questions? Let's see, we had one jump in the chat box. I have 3 dyslexic students, ages 8 through 10, and I'm wondering when I can work on spelling with them.
Okay, so that's a great question. Again, so spelling and reading are going to go hand in hand in relation to phonemic awareness. So spelling is actually even more challenging for a lot of kiddos because they have to generate the letter. They're not just pulling it. So what we really want to do, we want to make sure that phonemic awareness is strong. Once you're getting that segmenting down, that's probably a good point to start bringing in. Then you want to make sure that they're attaching the letter to the sound that they hear, and then you can jump into more words. One activity I really like, I made a note about it in my in the presentation. It's called dashes. Just kind of an activity I do, and what I'll have a kiddo do is I'll give them the word that they're supposed to spell, and then I'll have them make dashes for each sound that they hear as they segment it. So basically, it's kind of a direct application of taking the manipulative and putting it down, but instead of putting a manipulative down, we're going to make a mark. So say we're going to take the word task, and I want them to spell it. And so I'm going to say your word is task. Okay, what sounds do you hear? T, a, s, k. If you can play it off. If maybe they might sound it out, you might make the dashes, or have them do it kind of however they're able to kind of coordinate all these pieces. But so then we say, okay, we've got our sounds down. So basically, we've got our Elkonin sound box here. So let's take this. Now let's put the letters down that make the sounds that we heard. What's the first sound that you heard? A T. Okay, what letter makes a T sound? Okay, a T makes a T. Okay, what's the next sound that you hear in task? T, ah. Okay, ah. What letter makes an ah? and A. Okay, so now we're applying the letters to the sound and just doing it one by one. Okay, task, what sounds you hear? T, a, s. What sound make it so s? You've got an S and then a k. Okay. And so that can just be a really great way of kind of making that transition and helping show them, because our kiddos with dyslexia need explicit instruction. We can't expect them to sometimes make a jump between a task that we've really worked at in therapy and then the next step. Sometimes we have to guide them to that next step and show them how we bridge the gap. And so something like this can be a direct reflection of, okay, we've been working on blending or pulling apart all these sounds. What does that even mean? Why would we spend our time doing that? We want to spell, we want to read. This is why. You just spelled the word task by using your segmenting skills. And so another example, we might take the word, let's take the word bite. So sound it out for me, B-I-T. Okay. Now we all know that there's 4 letters in bite, but we only have 3 lines. So we need to make up for that. We're not worried right now about the letters. We're worried about the sounds, and this is what we need. But then what we want to do is we want to teach our kiddos what patterns go with the sounds that they hear. And there might be multiple options. And sometimes more than one letter might make one sound. So, so we do the same thing, sound it out, B-I-T. Okay, does that look right? How does that sound to you? Read it to me. What sounds do you hear? B-it. Uh-oh, we've got bit, but the word was bite. How do we take bite and change it to bit? Well, what we do is we talk through what letters can make the I sound. We have I consonant E. We have AI sometimes. We've got I by itself. We've got E-I-G-A, or E, so that's A, sorry. We've got IE, so we've got a variety. So we lay that out for the kiddos to know what their options are. And then we either help guide them in the early stages, or we have them write it in and see what looks right. And can they then identify what those patterns are? But usually we're talking about the I consonant E is usually one of the first ones we do, because that's one of the long vowels, and that's one of the most common long vowel spellings. So we teach that the silent E or the magic E makes I say its name. So we don't have a line there because E doesn't make a sound, it's quiet. But E influences I and changes it from I. So we can take different options like that, or we could show that, 2 letters make one sound, or one sound makes 2 letters, by putting it down like this, so they can kind of see how that correlation happens, even though when you're just talking through it, it doesn't always make sense.
And Kirsten, what do you think about spelling for these kiddos in the public school system? I know most kids come home with that 20-word spelling list for the week. Yeah. Any thoughts around that?
So it's a common pattern, and it's kind of an old practice of Monday you get the words, you practice them throughout the week. Friday you take the spelling test. What happens between the week is what matters. If you're going to do that, fine. But it's not send this home with the child, have them come back on Friday and take a test and expect the parents to teach these spelling skills. It is send the list home, let there be practice, but throughout the week you're teaching how and why the spelling is the way that it is. Now, if you have a random list of words, it's going to be much harder to explain how and why, and to teach throughout the week in just 3 short days that this is how these words are spelled, and you've got 20 words and memorize them. Because that's basically all that they're capable of doing at that point. And these kiddos aren't capable of memorizing. A lot of kiddos, maybe to a point, are, and then they reach a point where they overflow and they can't do it anymore. So what we really want to do is we want to pick a pattern. We want to pick a pattern and something that attaches all these letters and gives some consistency within the words that we have, whether it's all long I's, all long A's, all short I's, consonant blends, something along those lines, where there's a phonics pattern that you're addressing, and you can teach them what the pattern is and how it applies. Now within that, you might have different spellings, like you might have long A and give different options. It might be words that are spelled with AE. It might be words that are spelled with a consonant E. It might be, but they can see then, and they can kind of compare and contrast that one piece instead of having to figure out all these different spellings to 20 different words. So that is really the best advice I could give in terms of spelling is pick a pattern, use spelling lists that are geared with patterns, and then and something that pulls it together and makes it cohesive, and then teach kiddos how the sounds play into the words is ideal. And then in that piece, but then if you're going to do the Monday list and the Friday test, then make sure you're teaching throughout the week.
Ideally, we shorten that list for kiddos like ours. And so often there isn't a pattern in the curriculum that comes home from school. So
and absolutely, if there is a pattern, they don't always need the list shortened. Sometimes they do. And that should be an accommodation that is an option on the IEP, that there is the option to have the list shortened if they need it. But if there's a consistent pattern, sometimes you actually want more words so kids can have more to work with to see and understand how it all pulls together. So it's actually kind of the opposite effect. But if there's nothing to pull them together, holy cow, you are asking too much of that brain to try and pack in and jam in, 20 different spellings with how many different sounds and how many different letters, and when that doesn't even correlate from the beginning, it's too much.
It is too much.
Yeah, another thing that'll help some of these kids, especially the ones with dysgraphia, is what we call movable alphabet, where the letters are, they're called lorry letters, so that they're foamy, and you can have the kids then move the letters around. That's just another way to kind of get the spelling down without having to worry about how to make the letters. So if you can kind of combine that with the little dash marks, and then they put the letters on it, works out great for them.
Absolutely. That's a great point, Kim. And that really is the case. That formation is a whole nother ball game. And so that adds another level of complexity. And so as you're, adding and taking letter tiles or letters that are on magnets, or however, if they're already formed, that can be fantastic. Or simply having them say the sound and what letter would go with it and having you write it for them, just kind of bouncing all those different pieces to find kind of what is going to drill down to the level they need so that they can focus on the task at hand. And then you can start building other skills back onto it as that challenge is lessened. But what you really want to do is make sure that you're not asking them to deplete their gas tank with every different piece. You want them to be using their reserve for the piece you're actually trying to address, and then helping support in the areas that they just can't back up at that point.
Agreed. I just want to give a shout out to our special guest, Matthew, if he's still with us. And you're right.
He is. He did awesome.
Very brave, Matthew. I'm incredibly proud of you. So thank you for being with us tonight and letting Kirsten show us how she works her magic.
You are very welcome.
Incredibly proud of you. So thank you everyone for coming tonight. This is recorded and a link will be sent out to you. Please feel free to share it with your colleagues or other families that you know that might benefit. Decoding Dyslexia also has some other exciting webinars coming up in May. So check our website out. It's where we post under events all that we're offering. We are going to have 3, it sounds like, next month. And one of them will again host Kirsten with us. She'll be doing a Now What. We'll kick off with a 2-part series. One will be What is Dyslexia? And the second part will be Now What? And Kirsten will share with us some additional pointers for how to work with kiddos like ours. Someone had asked in the chat box, can we have the presentation slides? And yes, that'll be included in the email with the link to this recording. I think that wraps up all the questions. I don't want to cut anybody off. If you have anything that you want to add or share.